Welcome to everybody. I would like to get started now. It's high noon and lunch and learn, and so glad to have all of you here. Those who haven't been here before know that you just kind of nibble along with Anne and enjoy your time. We're going to end the program at about 5 to 1, so be sure you get all your questions in before that time. And now to begin with, I'd like to introduce, for those of you who haven't met her, our new pastor, Celeste Lassick, correct? Lassich.
Yeah, that's okay.
I thought of Lassie was sick. Oh, Lassie itches. Sorry.
Okay, so the joke on that one is my mom taught 8th grade English for many, many, many years, so she had to introduce herself to, 5 classes of kids, and so she would, because she's older, this wouldn't work in today's children. My name is spelled L-A-S-I-C-H, Lassich, and she would say, just think like the dog Lassie, and Lassie itches, Lassich. But yeah, you have to remember which of the things. So, yeah, who knows? So let us pray. Holy and gracious God, thank you. You who are the creator of all that is, we give thanks for the glory of your creation, for the wonder that surrounds us, for the miracles of the wildlife. And today particularly, we are just so grateful to learn more about desert tortoises, this amazing, amazing creature that you created. So we pray your Holy Spirit with us, bless this time and the food and the fellowship and the ways that we gather, knowing that you have made and loved everything. So we pray all this and more in Jesus' name. Amen.
So we welcome Anne here today, and first sort of our unsung hero. Chris never gets any reward for all the work that he does, so he keeps us visual and. Okay. Now Anne did write out a little bio, and we've seen her forever in church, and she's just such a part of our congregation. But this is her other life. She received her undergraduate degree at Colorado College in 1987. And her MS in Wildlife Science at the University of Arizona, no surprise there, in 1995. She has worked at a variety of nonprofit, county, state, and federal jobs in the West, all centered around wildlife biology and ecology. She currently works for the Utah Division of Wildlife as a desert tortoise biologist, focusing on monitoring, surveying areas prior to development, and translocation of displaced animals. And I wish they'd be quieter, so, I didn't know they'd be so noisy, Anne. But anyway, so Anne McLuckie.
Thank you. Okay, well, first of all, I've worked for the division for a number of years. And just recently, we had a full field season, where we actually go out and we walk 160 lines, basically, in the desert, and we count tortoises. And one of our field techs was named Keaton Wood, and he loves tortoises, and he created this video, and I thought it was perfect to start the talk with this, Shellbound 2025 Mojave Odyssey. Let's see if I can. Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah, it's so instinctive to point it there. Okay, a little drama before we start talk. So tortoises, I'll be basically talking about the natural history of the Mojave Desert tortoise, and I'll focus on the amazing adaptations that they have evolved with to be able to live in this really kind of inhospitable or very unpredictable desert climate. I do have, so just so you guys know, I have a live tortoise over there, Goliath. And then I have a hatchling over there on the table. And he was actually he was walking in some developed area. And so and he was turned into our office. So we will be releasing him in the reserve, but yeah. And then we do have some shell remain tortoises that is just to the right of the tortoise. And we have posters. If we run out of posters, you can ask to get some, I can get you some additional posters. And then we have some flyers that you can pick up as well. So yeah. So before I begin, I'd like to talk a little bit about Washington County. Washington County has grown dramatically, as I'm sure many of you are aware. It was the fastest growing county in the United States for a period of time. It was the fastest growing city in the US for several decades. Utah had the distinction of having the highest birth rate in 2023, but also in other previous years. And it's also been the fastest growing state for at least a decade. So that's kind of created this like influx of humans and created potential conflict between tortoises and, of course, development of habitat and so forth. The climate is, we basically have an average rainfall of 8 inches per year. And of course, as you all know, lots of sunny days. And we definitely experience below freezing temperatures in the winter, and then of course, very hot temperatures in the summer. So whatever animals, native animals live here have to really be able to tolerate wide fluctuations in temperature. So they have to have really amazing adaptations to allow them not only to be able to tolerate this wide fluctuation in temperature, but also unpredictable and limited rainfall during the year. And so just to emphasize the point of how fast Washington County has grown, you can see like just between 1980 and 2000, over 80% of growth just in the city of St. George, so pretty incredible. So tortoises have been around for a very long time, basically roughly 230 million years ago during the Triassic period, so they're around with the dinosaurs. Tortoises are native to southwest Utah, so we know that because of petroglyphs and fossils and so on. So sometimes you might hear people say that tortoises have been introduced here, but actually that's kind of an urban legend. They are native to this area. So tortoises, of course, are reptiles. They're in the Reptilia class. And they are in, of course, the order Testudinata, which includes all tortoises and turtles. So you can be accurate and say that tortoises are turtles. And within that order, within that group, there's 14 different families. And tortoises are one family within that order, and they're in the Testudinidae family. And they are they specialize in terrestrial, land-dwelling, and they have thick elephantine legs and no webbed feet. And of course, their genus name is Gophorus agassizi. So gopher, kind of emphasizing how they can dig deep burrows. They have really thick legs that allow them to dig deep burrows in the soil. And agassizi is actually from a naturalist in the late 1800s. So this is the range of the desert tortoise. So when I first started working here, the tortoise, the Sonoran and the Mojave tortoises were actually one species, but they've actually been divided out into two distinct species, the Mojave desert tortoise, which is native to this area, and it is found in California, Nevada, and Utah, as well as little parts of Arizona north of the Colorado River, and then the Sonoran tortoise, which is in Arizona and parts of Mexico. And this is a close-up of the Mojave Desert Tortoise range. You can see it extends all the way up to the northeastern edge of their range extends into southwestern Utah. So one thing, as we know with habitat growth or human growth, et cetera, that has led to habitat loss, degradation, fragmentation. And here's some photos of just rapid development. That's along Snow Canyon Parkway, and that's Paradise Canyon. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that area, but that kind of created kind of tension between conserving habitat as well as allowing growth within Washington County. So Washington County then pursued a habitat conservation plan, which allowed them to build some areas of tortoise habitat, but in exchange, they would create a protected area called the Red Cliff Desert Reserve. And that's a 62,000 acre protected area that's north of St. George and north of Hurricane as well as in Ivins. And then the federal lands within that Red Cliff Desert Reserve is protected under the National Conservation Area. So there's actually two National Conservation Areas in southwest Utah. There's the Red Cliff National Conservation Area, and then there's the Beaver Dam Slope National Conservation Area. So now I'll switch gears and talk about really cool desert adaptations. So the first adaptation I want to talk about is a hard shell. So tortoises obviously never leave their shells. They're not like hermit crabs. They can't leave their shell and choose another one. They're permanently tied to their shell, and the upper part of the shell is called the carapace, and the bottom is called the plastron. So the shell is really important because it allows them it protects them from predators, basically. So really, as an adult tortoise, the only predator they have to worry about is mountain lions, which can actually crack open their shell, humans, as well as a coyote, which could probably chew a leg or something, but doesn't have the jaw width to crack open their shell. And then also the shell helps prevent water loss. So this is actually a picture of a hatchling. And so again, I have that live hatchling over there. But you can see as when a hatchling is born, it basically has what you call these scutes or hatchling plates. And so it has no growth rings at all. It has not grown at all. And just to back up, a female will dig a hole, lay between 1 and 14 eggs, on average 5, and then cover the eggs and then just walk away. And then 3 months later, the hatchlings emerge, and there's no parental care. And what's really cool about hatchlings is when they emerge from their egg and they get to the surface of the soil, there's actually a yolk sac that's attached to their plastron, and they absorb that into their plastron, into their body, and that kind of gives them an extra boost, when they're first kind of coming into the world and experiencing the world. So that's actually really important adaptation that allows hatchlings to potentially survive longer. But then as tortoises grow, they actually will grow around each of the edges of their hatchling plates. So you can see there's one growth ring around each of these hatchling plates. And then we'll get to this. There's more additional growth rings around this tortoise. And this is an older adult tortoise, and you can see all the different growth rings. And in the center is that hatchling plate. And that allows the tortoise to grow uniformly. And and here are two pictures of really old tortoises. So on the left is a tortoise that, you can see the growth rings, but there's starting to be some wear. And here, this tortoise is so old that all of its growth rings have actually smoothed down, been sanded down. So you can imagine going in and out of those burrows as sanding down.
Do you know its age by the number of growth rings on the tree?
That's a really good question. Unfortunately, no, it's not like tree rings. So tortoises will get a growth ring every time they experience a growth spurt. So one growth ring doesn't necessarily equate to 1 year. It would be super convenient if that was the case, but unfortunately not. So a tortoise, for example, might get 0 growth rings in a really dry year, but could get multiple growth rings in a wet year. Okay, so now I'll switch gears and talk about water adaptations. And as I mentioned before, with only 8 inches of rain falling over an entire year on average, tortoises really have to be able to conserve water to survive. So some of the things they are able to do is they can actually store water in their bladder. So they're kind of the first inventors of the camelback or the bladder bag. I don't know if you guys have used those when you go hiking. And so, yeah, so they basically can reabsorb that water in their bladder into their bloodstream, into their body during really dry periods or droughts. And they can store water for several months, so they don't actually have to drink free water in order to survive over the course of the year. But they ultimately do need to get water, so they can't survive forever without, freestanding water. And how they do that, if we tried to store our urine for several months, we wouldn't be doing so well. We probably would not survive. Tortoises can do that because they take the toxicity in their urine, like the nitrogen waste, the ammonia, the salts, and they concentrate it into this kind of white pasty substance, which is called urates, and then they can excrete that separately from their urine. And that allows them to store the water because they're extracting all those kind of toxic minerals in their urine into those urates and excreting them when they need to. And so that's a really amazing adaptation that allows them to survive in an environment where water is unpredictable.
Just a question related to that. In the past, I've heard that if you see a tortoise like in the road, you shouldn't pick it up because then it'll just lose all the water, the urine.
That is true. So and I'll actually talk about that later in the talk, but no, I'll talk about that now because it ties to this. So when we talk to people, we tell them, you can enjoy tortoises from a distance, but don't pick them up because one of the things they do to kind of scare people away is to pee. And so you basically, if a tortoise is peeing, that's kind of like if you're in the middle of a hike and you just dump your water bottle out and lose all of your water. And so depending upon the season, like for example, if you pick up a tortoise and it loses all its water in the middle of June, that could actually spell the death of the tortoise because it might not get water for a long time. And it's just lost all of its water. So there is an exception, which I'll talk about at the end of the talk. Like, for example, if you see a tortoise in the middle of the road, the biggest danger to that tortoise in that particular moment is getting smushed by a car. So you could, in that case, pick up the tortoise, move it safely across the road on the other side of the fence. Yeah. And tortoises are amazing because they can actually drink water from self-created or naturally created, not self-created, but naturally created water catchments or basins at the bottom of slopes or depressions in rocks. And they have really good spatial memory, so they remember where those are. And they can raise their posterior shell and kind of bend their head forward to access those puddles. And then they can also channel water. So if it's raining, they can actually channel water from the top of their head to their mouths. And they can absorb water. So in a puddle, they can actually absorb water not only through their nose and their mouth, but through their cloaca. So that's pretty amazing. And they can increase body mass up to 17% from just drinking fresh water. So again, just an amazing adaptation. And actually, I have a couple of slides which show you a tortoise kind of tilting its body forward, trying to get access to all of that water in that puddle. And there's its milk mustache, or in this case, the dirt mustache. So now I'm shifting gears to another amazing adaptation, scaly, tough skin. And that helps them to not only minimize water loss, but also survive in an environment where you have a lot of pokey things and sharp rocks and so forth. So here's another photo of a tortoise with very scaly skins on its forelegs. And you can see a little green around the mouth, so it's just eaten something. And tortoises are ectotherms. So what that means is we humans are endotherms, meaning that we spend a lot of energy maintaining our body at a certain temperature. Tortoises use the environment and behavior to regulate their temperature, and they can tolerate a much wider range. So when it gets too hot, they go into a burrow and escape or avoid those extreme temperatures. And when they need to warm up, they do what we call basking, and that's what this tortoise is doing. So it's pulling out its forelegs and its hind legs and increasing the surface area and heating up using the sun. And so, yeah, so they depend on external sources of body heat and behavior to kind of regulate their temperature. And that allows them to conserve a lot of energy. They don't need to eat as much and so forth. And again, they have those elephantine hind feet and shovel-like forefeet, which allows them to dig deep, deep burrows that are, 10 to 12 feet deep in some cases.
What are those things kind of coming up over there?
Oh, the gular. Yeah, so that's the gular, that right there. And actually, I'll talk about that in a minute. That males have larger gulars than females.
We've seen tortoises eating wildflowers. Is that what they eat?
What was your last question? Yeah.
Eating wildflowers.
Yes. So turtles or tortoises are herbivores, so they will eat flowers and cactus pads and all sorts of vegetation. So that's what they focus on, is basically vegetation. And so tortoise burrows are really important for tortoises because, like I mentioned, it allows them to escape extreme temperatures, not only super hot temperatures, but cold temperatures, and helps to avoid predation, as well as it protects them from dehydration, because inside a soil burrow, it's more humid relative to the surface, to outside the burrow in the hot desert heat. And they can conserve water and energy when they're in their burrow. And tortoises will hibernate. Well, technically the term is really not hibernation, it's actually brumation for tortoises. I use hibernation because people kind of know what hibernation is, but technically the term is brumation. So that means the tortoises will retreat to a winter burrow and stay there for several months. So generally tortoises will probably go into their burrows around November, December, and then not come out till February or March. It's kind of weather dependent, and then they also estivate, which means that during the hot summer times, I actually estivate too, during the hot summer times, they will go into like a summer burrow and not come out. They'll just avoid those hot temperatures, and that's what I kind of want to do too, go into my house and not come out. Oh, sure. So you can't really see the tortoise here, but this is the deep cave that a tortoise is using. And there's a tortoise right there under a sandstone slab. And here is a tortoise right here under the sandstone slab. And this is actually a tortoise. This is in Zion National Park. So there are tortoises in Zion National Park. And this right here is a radio on a tortoise. So for a couple of years, Zion tracked tortoises using transmitters. They glued transmitters to their back, and then they were able to track them. So as I mentioned before, tortoises are herbivores. So their diet is entirely plants, basically. They can eat wildflowers, forbs, or native plants. You can see this is the desert, woolly desert. And they like that plant. They can also eat cactus pads and cactus flowers. And here's some really cool pictures of a tortoise eating flowers from a fishhook cactus. Yeah, ouch is right? Home ranges. So basically home range is where they live. It's basically their turf. And so it can vary quite a bit from 2 to 50 acres, 2 to 50 hectares, 5 to 120 acres, but it depends a lot on the quality of habitat. And males typically have larger home ranges than females. Males will actually mate with multiple females, and females are pretty sedentary, and their focus is basically to lay eggs. And tortoises have excellent spatial memories. So they remember where those burrows are, where the winter burrows are. I've seen tortoises reuse winter burrows year after year. And like I mentioned before, they also remember where those depressions are in sandstone rocks. So when it rains, they can go to those areas and soak up the water. So camouflage is another adaptation that tortoises have. Can you guys find the tortoise in this photo? Right there. And here's another. So this tortoise was telemetered, and I tracked it to this bush, but it took me like 20 minutes, well, maybe that's exaggeration, maybe 10 minutes, to find this tortoise, and there it is, right there. But it was deep in that bush. So they not only are well camouflaged, but they can also really use vegetation to hide themselves. Another adaptation, which we talked about earlier, is the large gular projection on the plastron. So it's large in males, smaller in females. But with males, it will actually be upturned. And males also have very well-developed chin glands. And those chin glands, during the mating season, and they'll have hormones like testosterone, and they can rub those on rocks. And tortoises have a very good sense of smell, so they can track who's been where and so forth. Yes, and they do share home ranges, but they can actually fight over females. So there is a video here. Let's see if I can. Oh, sorry. Oh wait. Okay, there we go. So that beep is the telemetry unit, and it's tracking us, or the person who's tracking this tortoise, to the tortoise, which happens to be fighting with another tortoise. So when tortoises are fighting, they can bob their heads, they can ram, they can shove each other, and they can use that gular to flip each other as well. And again, like I mentioned, they fight over females, and they could even fight over burrows or dens when they know a female's inside. And if flipped, the loser really needs to flip themselves back over, because if they don't, they could potentially become or get overheated. And here's another video of tortoises fighting. Oh, there we go. So you can see there's the radio right there on the tortoise. So that allowed me to track those tortoises, or at least that one tortoise. And you can see they both have pretty big gular horns, or gulars. Now here's a moral choice there, right? Is he going to flip him back over or walk away? That's the tortoise breathing. You can hear him. So he's head bobbing, he's biting. Unfortunately, I stopped the video, but then right after I stopped the video, he flipped both of them. He flipped himself and the other one at the same time. I'm like, oh, that would have been a great video, but oh well. And tortoises, I like to say they have four-wheel drive and low center of gravity, which allows them to walk pretty much anywhere. You'd think tortoises, oh, they like flat, easy terrain, but no, they can actually walk in some pretty rugged terrain. And they also have amazing reproductive strategy. So they can actually, amazingly, store sperm. Females can store sperm up to 5 years after mating. And that so basically that's called delayed fertilization. So they can store the sperm and not fertilize the eggs. That can also allow them to produce multiple clutches of eggs from a single mating event. And so that helps with genetic diversity. And it also is really advantageous because what happens in the spring, if a female doesn't see a male the entire year, or at least the spring, she can still lay eggs, right? Because she's got that sperm stored. So that's really an amazing adaptation. And they can actually produce or lay up to 1 to 3 clutches in the spring to the summer. So clutches is basically a batch of eggs. And in each batch of eggs, or each clutch, they can have an average of 5 eggs, anywhere from like 1 to 10. And then again, and each clutch could be from multiple males because they have that delayed fertilization. And so they use kind of a bet hedging strategy when they lay eggs. And that's kind of like in the stock market when you in early years, you're putting money every month into the stock market ideally. And so that's bet hedging, right? Because you don't really know if the stock market's going to do well or bad or whatever. That's what tortoises do, or females. They basically are laying eggs. They don't know 3 months from now when the hatchling comes out or emerges, is there going to be lots of rain and food for that tortoise or not? And so that's basically they're spreading those risks across time and space, and then that allows them to kind of cope with a environment which is unpredictable and quite varied. And then they also have temperature-dependent sex determination, which is pretty amazing. So instead of using energy to determine, as humans, we determine the sex based on genetics and so forth. Tortoises actually use the environment to determine the sex of their hatchlings. So basically, if they lay their eggs and there's cooler temperatures, those eggs or hatchlings will be males. And if they lay their eggs and it happens to be a hot year, or maybe they don't dig the hole deep enough and it's closer to the surface of the earth, or the surface, then those hatchlings will be females. And so that has been advantageous because it's allowed like fluctuating temperatures to kind of help balance or maintain a sex ratio over time. However, global climate change puts kind of a new kink to that. And so it could lead to skewed sex ratios and potentially threaten long-term survival. So we don't really know exactly the long-term implications, but we're watching for them. So the overall life history of tortoises is such that, the hatchling that you saw over there and in some of the photos, those hatchlings are really vulnerable. Pretty much they're a tasty snack for anything, like roadrunners, foxes, ravens, etc. And so they estimate around 95 to 98% of eggs and hatchlings will actually die before they become an adult. So the life history of tortoises is built such that there is an expectation of high juvenile mortality. But the strategy is that when tortoises become an adult, they will continue. They have very long lives, tortoises, and they don't reproduce till about 20 years of age. But once they start reproducing, they'll continue to churn out eggs year after year, and tortoises can live to like 60, 70 years of age. And so they can produce over time long periods, or lots of eggs, and hopefully, obviously, some of those will survive to become an adult. But anything that impacts adult populations or adults can impact the population, because the expectation in that life history is that there'll be some hatchlings that will survive to adulthood, and those adults will live a long period of time, and that once they're an adult, there's really high survival, like 98% survival of adults. So, the Division of Wildlife puts in a lot of effort studying tortoises, monitoring tortoises, etc. We see tortoises as kind of an umbrella species, meaning that, it's kind of the canary in the coal mine, so to speak, where if tortoises are declining, that can also mean that other reptiles are declining as well. So we do monitor tortoises. Tortoises have, when I first started here, tortoises were, the density was 30 adult tortoises per square kilometer. It has decreased. The last time we monitored in 2023, it was about 20 tortoises per square kilometer. So tortoises, have decreased just with the challenges of drought and wildfires and so forth. Just going back to that, that's not to say that we do care about other species like Gila monsters, so forth, but those animals are much harder to monitor because they're underground so much of the time. So, and then my last part of the talk is what can you do to help? So one thing is to protect habitat by staying on designated trails. So it's really important that we don't smash food plants for tortoises or shrubs where they can hide and escape from predators. And then when you are walking on trails, just keep a lookout for tortoises. Don't step on them, obviously. If you see a tortoise, you can enjoy it from a distance and obviously leave it alone. Oops. And then, of course, in the road, this gets back to, Alicia, your question earlier. If you see a tortoise in the middle of the road, we do tell you not to move tortoises, but there is that exception. If you see a tortoise in the middle of the road, the biggest danger for that particular tortoise in that moment is getting smushed by a car. So we do recommend or encourage people to either call us, or if there's not an opportunity to do that, to grab that, to pull your car on the side of the road, grab that tortoise and move it slowly to the side of the road and over the tortoise fence. We do have tortoise fences that prevent tortoises from getting onto the roadway. And then, of course, don't release captive tortoises out into the wild. If you know of somebody who wants to get rid of their tortoise that they've had for years, they can always call us, no questions asked. We will take that tortoise and put it into our captive tortoise program. We have a captive tortoise program that for tortoises that aren't able to go back out into the wild, either because they have disease or because they've been captive their whole lives, or we don't know the origin of that tortoise. Maybe they came from Arizona or Nevada. And then throw away your trash. Don't provide food for ravens. Humans are subsidizing ravens, so we have seen an increase of ravens across the West. So we want to make sure, when you throw away, ideally in a covered trash can. That's a really bad trash can. That just encourages ravens to come. And then ravens, of course, have been implicated basically in large amounts of predation of juvenile tortoises, because they're very smart birds and they can figure out how to, basically what they do is they take a hatchling, they pick it up in its beak, and then they drop it from a distance, and then the shell is cracked, and then they clean out the shell. And actually I have an example of one of the smaller shell or freeze-dried tortoises is a good example of a shell that's been kind of cleaned out by a raven. And then, of course, if you see illegal collection, that would be people wandering around with sacks and they look suspicious. You can always contact the Division of Wildlife and report it. And then, of course, extinguish campfires and cigarette butts, because wildfires are a big problem. This is the Mill Creek Road right after the 2020 fire. All of the shrubs just burned, pretty devastating. It looks much better now, obviously, but it was pretty devastating. And you can see the tortoise comes out of his burrow and he sees there's like literally no shrubs. Poor guy. And so that's the end of my talk. So does anybody have any questions?
What does a typical week look like for you?
Right. Yeah, it really depends on the season. So in the spring, in the beginning, I'll just go quickly through the year. Like in the beginning of the year, basically, I was hiring a crew to make sure, that we had technicians, young people, that could do a lot of walking and hiking, looking for tortoises. And so that was basically January, February, March, and then April, May, June is when we actually monitored for tortoises. So we would go out pretty much every day, running or walking transect lines. Transects are basically random lines that we have out in the desert, and just counting tortoises, and then tracking our telemetered tortoises. In the summer, I'm basically writing up some of our reports and kind of summarizing what we did. And then in the fall, I walk fence line to make sure that we identify any potential holes in the fence, and then contract, hopefully, or hire contractors to fix those holes. And then we also respond to urban calls. So people saying, hey, I've got a tortoise in my yard, can you come pick it up? And so we'll pick those tortoises up and figure out where that tortoise should go. Should it go back into the reserve? Is it healthy? Et cetera. And then also if there's areas that are going to be developed, we go out there and we survey those areas with helping Washington County and then remove those tortoises out of harm's way, and then those tortoises ultimately get translocated. So, long story.
Is there any way to tell the age of a tortoise?
So how we age tortoises is very coarse method, basically, because we can't count growth rings. So basically, we put the shell. We look at the shell wear, or the wear on the shell, and we place it into 7 different categories. So based on how much, how much growth, if their growth rings are distinct. How many growth rings, like for example, if there's no growth rings, then that would be class 1, a hatchling. If there's less than 6 growth rings, that's class 2. And then depending upon, how much wear there is on each of those scutes, and if there's depression. So as tortoises get older, their scutes can actually start getting depressed, kind of like basically osteoporosis, right? They're like kind of losing minerals and calcium, and so, So we basically just kind of coarsely, I would say for Goliath, he's probably 50, 60 years old. He might even be a little bit older just because he's been taken care of really well, so he's not going to get the worn growth rings and scutes as a normal tortoise. Yeah.
What's his history?
That's a really good question. He has been with the county or at the county office for years, so I don't know where he originally came from. I don't know his history. That's a good question. Need to find that out. He's just really good with people, and because he's active and he eats food, and people like to watch him. So.
What diseases are they most prone to?
Yeah, I didn't actually talk about that. Yeah, so I guess I did talk a little bit about that. But the biggest disease, well, there's 2 major diseases. Shell disease, so that is kind of like a fungus on their shell, but they can survive for many years with that. But then the other big disease is the upper respiratory tract disease, and that is a bacteria that kind of gets into their nasal passages and prevents them from smelling, causes a lot of congestion, and then they often die from secondary infections from that. It's kind of like getting pneumonia, basically. Yeah. Did you have a question? Oh, okay, that was your question, yeah. And then they can actually get herpes too, but we don't have any, and there's a whole wealth of other diseases that they can get, but those are the more common ones. Luckily, we don't have herpes, the oral herpes in Utah, or at least we've never detected it on Utah tortoises, but yeah. And they can actually they can get ticks. So I've seen ticks on tortoises, and some of those ticks have actually, some of those ticks have the relapsing fever. So you definitely want to, like if you're, like when I see a tick on a tortoise, I definitely don't want to get it on me because of that potential for relapsing fever. Tortoises can't really swim per se, but they definitely can go into deeper water as long as they're still touching the ground. So they can't really swim. But yeah, for the most part they can survive a flash flood. Although it depends on where the burrow is located. I actually have seen a dead tortoise at the bottom of a wash, and it had been turned over, and it appeared that it probably had not survived the flash flood. So, yeah.
When I was at Arizona game and fish, we had people bring in tortoises that had been hit because we were trying to cross the interstate, and we would have to have a vet put a fiberglass covering over their shell so that they could have that try to heal, and then redo the fiberglass, and then redo the fiberglass until it was healed enough that it wouldn't need.
Yeah, we've had some of those instances too where we've had tortoises hit by cars. What I've found is that if a tortoise is clipped on the side, then it can survive. We recently had a tortoise at Snow Canyon State Park that had been clipped on the side, and so we took it to the vet, and he used epoxy to kind of repair the shell, and then we were able to release the tortoise a half a year later. But yeah, if the tortoise is hit head on, then yeah, we either have to euthanize it or it dies immediately. Yeah.
Is the bottom of their body armored, or is that soft? I mean, like a
Yes.
coyote could flip it over and then it go right into the abdomen, so to speak?
Yeah, it's a hard shell, just like the top. So it's the bottom of the shell is called the plastron, and the top of the shell is the carapace. And when a tortoise is young, that shell is soft. But as it ages, it gets more layers. The shell is actually made of like the keratin, basically the material from your fingernails, and it's just many, many layers of that. And so when they're an adult, it's a really hard shell. Yeah.
How do the animals get at it then? I mean, do they separate the top from the bottom, or they grab the head, or?
Right. The only animals that really can kill an adult tortoise would be a mountain lion that has a strong enough jaw that can actually crack open their shell, actually. In fact, the shell right there, in fact, let me go grab it. Good question. This shell is interesting because this tortoise was radioed, so you can see the radio. But this, we believe, it was a mountain lion kill. There's the tooth mark. And then typical of mountain lions, it's like they use this as a bowl and they completely clean out the shell. They destroy the plastron and they cleaned out the shell, and you can see the vertebrae is actually attached to the shell. So it's part of the tortoise. Tortoise can't leave its shell. So in this, yeah, you can touch that. So.
Rick and I were out off-roading once, and we saw them fighting, and one was flipped over, and we debated, should we leave them alone, or should we turn them over?
Yeah.
And I couldn't leave them like that, so I turned them over. But was that the right thing to do?
I mean, I personally think it's the right thing to do. I mean, generally tortoises should be able to turn themselves over, but there are situations where we've run across a tortoise that looked like it had recently died, and it likely couldn't turn itself back over. So there are instances where, for whatever reason, maybe it's like wedged in some rocks or whatever, the tortoise can't turn itself over. And if it can't do it quick enough, if it's in the middle of the day and there's full sun, then it will overheat pretty easily. So personally, I would do it. Don't tell anybody.
I was watching one of the, I think it's called Wild Babies on TV, and it was the mating of a female and a male, and he was having a tough time, and apparently it was because he was a young male, and he didn't quite know what to do or how to carry on. And finally the female just walked away. And he just stood there. I guess we all have problems.
I wonder if any of you, if you haven't had a chance to look on the site, because Anne's going to have to sort of start cleaning and taking
Here,
things
yep.
away around 5 to 1. So if any of you want to, unless there are more questions, I don't
yeah.
want to shut off any questions that you might have. And there are some handouts there as well. So please take advantage and say hello to Goliath.
Yes.
He's been desperately trying to get out of that box for the last 20
And
minutes.
then maybe Anne, if she's over there, are there other questions that you might have for Anne?
Well, thanks for the great questions. Excellent questions.